I think it's just a part of being old. I think your blood must thin out. And of course, I take an aspirin every morning. It helps to keep it thin. I'm glad I don't have to take blood thinners anymore because I stayed cold. My hands and feet stayed so cold all the time. I could hardly stand it.
When did they get you off the blood thinners?
18 months after I had my stents put in. I had my stents put in on about August the 2nd, I think it was, of 2012, so 18 months after that.
I was curious. So in our first episode, you brought us from your early youth to the 60s.
Uh-huh.
And last time we kind of jumped around a little bit from different topics, and it wasn't quite so linear it wasn't so much Cormie's linear story. So I was curious. Like today is probably the last time I'll be able to record until I get back. I'll be traveling for a bit.
Okay.
So I was wondering if we might be able to go from the 60s up to present time and just kind of fill in the gaps there. And so then what I'll end up doing for the recordings is the first and this one will probably be sequential, and then the other one will be kind of the additional commentary for our first round.
Makes sense.
I think I don't think we'd ever get the whole story, but from what I remember when we ended a couple of weeks ago, we were in Vietnam, but I think we could probably get to the point where we're almost out of that, which transitions maybe a part of the story I haven't heard a lot of. Is at that point in time, I've always assumed, and of course I may be wrong, that you were close to getting out of the Army. But I don't know exactly if you had a couple more years in there, when that happened, and how you ended up in, the transition to, I guess, Delaware. I'm sure there's a lot of story in there.
Yes, and came back from Vietnam in the spring of 1969. And they had me stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky.
I've been there.
And so had I. And I did not want to go back there again. But, I hadn't been able to get out of the previous assignment, so I figured I'll never get out of this one. So I went back to Aberdeen, Maryland, because I had a lot of friends back there and visited. I had 30-day vacation, 30 days leave. And I went back to visit some friends back there in Aberdeen. And I went out to the old ordnance school where I'd been an instructor. And talked to the guys out there. And the boss out there said, where are you going when you come back? I told him, he said, man, you don't want to go to Fort Knox, do you? I said, no. I said, but I don't see any way out of it. He said, well, we got an open slot here. He said, would you like to come back here to the school and teach again? I said, I'd love to. So he said, well, you hang around a few days. So I did. I had some friends that put me up for a few days in town. And I went back out, and he gave me new orders. He changed my orders from Fort Knox to the Ordnance School at Aberdeen, Maryland. And this is when I really got to know Deborah, my wife. I had known her before, just in passing or being in a group with her, a Bible study group or something like that. And but I got to know her a little better. And we, from the Servicemen's Christian Center, which is out in Aberdeen in the city, that's where we met a lot, and because we both ministered out there. And used to have, like on Saturdays, they had beach trips because we were over there by the shore. And so I signed up to go on a beach trip. Well, she was on a beach trip with a guy named Ron, and but while we were on the beach, Ron slept all day long. And so I took an advantage of that and got to know Deborah a little bit better. We walked up and down the beach all day long and talked, had a snack and that sort of thing. And
Ron didn't know any better, did he?
no, he didn't. But he later accused me of taking his fiancée. Of course, she didn't know anything about being his fiancée. And he was young and had just come back from Korea, and he was wanting a wife, so he was wanting a wife. He thought she'd be nice. So I got to know Deborah a little bit, and we finally had a date, and we were going to spend a whole day together. And that morning they put me out at Aberdeen to the ordnance school. They put me behind the fence. Behind the fence means I went into a secure area, and I wasn't allowed to come out until 5 o'clock that evening because there were some things going on back there that I needed to take care of. And I couldn't call out. There's no call in, no call out. And so she was waiting around for me all day long. And finally when I got out, I called her, and she was still waiting. And so this was our first official date, and that was about 1969 or 70, 1970. And I was close to getting out. And the reason I was close to getting out was because they had me on orders to go back to Vietnam. And I did not want to go back there. I saw that as a waste of blood and time and flesh and money, and there was nothing being accomplished over there that was positive, and things were just going from bad to worse over there, and I saw no point in going back. So I put in for retirement so they couldn't send me. That also meant that I had to get off 2 promotion lists. I was on the Master Sergeant promotion list, and I was on the Warrant Officer promotion list. And you can't retire if you're on the promotion list without pulling off of it. And so they don't promote retired people. And I applied to go to Washington Bible College about that time.
Now, was Debbie from Maryland, or for some
No, she was
reason I
from-
always thought she was from Delaware?
She was from Delaware, up in the Wilmington area.
And what was she doing down in Aberdeen?
Well, she started coming down there with her church group. They came
Okay.
down to minister at the Servicemen's Christian
So they
Center.
specifically came down to do that.
Uh-huh. And she got to know people down there,
Right.
and made some friends, and of course I was one of them. She'd also made some other friends. A very good friend of mine, Dave Lawrence. He and Debbie had dated a couple of times. But they did not click because David was heading in a totally different direction after he got out of the Army. He knew he was going with Wycliffe Bible translators, and she wasn't up to that. And so that didn't work out. She also went with another one of my close buddies, Pete Bennett. And Pete and I wound up over in Vietnam at the same time. We used to get together for Bible studies over there. But Deborah and I got to know one another pretty good. And so in December of 1970, I had retired. And I went with the director of the Servicemen's Christian Center to Connecticut on a preaching trip. And we preached in several churches up there, and we were representing the Servicemen's Center, which was a ministry of the Eastern Regional of the IFCA. And we got snowed in up there with about 3 or 4 feet of snow. And so we didn't get back to Aberdeen for late in December. And the first night back, I didn't want to waste any more time. I asked the director if I could use his office, and so Deborah and I went in there, and I proposed to her on the 13th day of December, 1970.
Now here's the question for the people who may one day hear this. At what age were you there? You were born in 28, this is 1970, is that right?
Yeah,
So my math is bad, but that put you at what, 42?
42 or 43, I can't.
And Deborah was how old?
Oh, she was just 25.
25.
I'm 17 years older than her.
Yeah. And you've aged well, but she's aged even better.
She sure has. She's a real beauty at its age of 70.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So December 13th, 1970. What did she say?
She said yes. And then I called her again at her home the next day to verify that she really meant yes. And I had also interviewed down in D.C. with the post office department for a job traveling all over the United States and working with postal employees who had a problem with alcohol and drugs. And on the same day, first part of January, I got a letter of acceptance from the post office department and a letter of acceptance from the Washington Bible College. So I had to make a decision. And I spent a whole day by myself in prayer, weighing the pros and the cons and that sort of thing. So I made a decision to go to the Bible College because I knew I could minister to recovering people anywhere and everywhere and anytime.
Now, when you talk about alcohol and drugs in 1970 in recovery, I mean, that has to be a tremendously different thing than we talk about now, almost 50 years later. How accepting was that? Or was it something that was sort of hidden?
It was more acceptable, and it was somewhat hidden. There was very few. The drug thing was very minimal, but alcohol and the postal department was really hurting. They had lost a lot of good people because of alcoholism, and they wanted somebody to see if we could do something about it. But of course, alcoholism is easier to hide than drug addiction, because alcoholism is, drinking alcohol is publicly acceptable, and even many Christians accept alcohol in moderation, and so there's no stigma to drinking alcohol like there is to drugs. And but I went ahead and chose to go to Washington Bible College. And when I had first gone to check out the college, they were in downtown Washington, D.C. And when I went to check in, I went up there to the college campus there in D.C., and everything was closed up and sealed up and nailed up, and they had signs on the doors that they were moved to Lanham, Maryland. And I didn't know where Lanham, Maryland was, so I got a taxi. I asked him if he knew where it was. He said, "Oh, yes." So he took me out to Lanham, and they'd moved to a 65-acre campus out there, which was had been sold by a Catholic monastery group. Their lawyer had run off to South America with all their money, and they'd gone bust. And so they got it at a pretty good price. It's a beautiful campus. And so I was there for 4 years. Worked on the grounds during the summertime, helped build some buildings and did a lot of other work. And because at that time, I was handy. I was old enough to know a lot of things, how to work. And of course, I didn't know it, but I knew I was divorced, but I didn't know that since I'd never been in church before, I didn't know that divorced people are not supposed to get married again. And of course, the college had frowned on that, and 2 guys on the college board voted against accepting me as a student. I didn't know that until a couple of years later. But President ruled in my favor, overruled him, and I was accepted as a student. Of course, Deborah and I were married in June of 1971. I had one semester of college behind me, and that's when I found out that you had to have permission if you're going to college. Bible college, you have to have permission to get married. And here I am, a grown man, asking for permission to get married. So I went through the process, and of course, again, I got 2 people turned me down on that. And from that moment on, one of the professors gave me F's on everything, and so evidently he didn't agree with my being there. I did have a conference with me, and he changed my final score to D, so I could pass. I couldn't transfer it, but I could pass. Deborah, she enrolled as a student also, and worked there and on the switchboard at nights. And she was shunned by the other ladies in the office because she was married to a divorced man. And these are just the way things were in the Christian community at that time. And I know they've changed somewhat since then, not drastically, but somewhat since then. I had a good time at Washington Bible College. I found out that I had already taken 2 years worth of courses by testing just before I got out of the Army. So I was able to pick and choose what I wanted to study. And I studied every Bible course they had except minor prophets. That couldn't be worked out in a schedule. I studied camping, which a retired soldier ought to know how to camp. I studied riflery, which a retired soldier ought to know how to shoot a rifle. But they were fun classes. I enjoyed them, and I got a chance to meet a lot of people that were going to be in the camping ministry later on. And took a lot of other fun courses, graphic arts, things like that, how to make overhead transparencies, how to make slide for your slide projector and all that kind of stuff. Of course, we don't fool with any of that stuff anymore. That's passé.
Now, I remember you telling me one time that you thought that you wanted to be a missionary.
Yes.
But with some of the things that you've already alluded to, with being divorced and remarried and whatnot, that was not a possibility. And I don't know if we could speak that to every church, but 50 years ago it might have been the case.
It was. It was pretty much.
So how did that transition you to what you had coming next?
Well, the first semester I was there, I started college in the spring semester, January, and they had their mission conference in the spring, and I talked to all these missionaries that were there presenting their work, and I found out that they wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole because I was divorced and remarried, or going to get remarried. And
it's a wonder you didn't hop off the boat and go back to drinking after hearing all that.
No, I'd already made my peace about that.
Yeah.
I'd already made my peace about that. No going back.
Good.
Stick with it. Hold the course. So I stuck it out. Wound up assisting one of the professors while I was there, teaching some classes. And then I tried to get a job teaching because that's what I'd done in the military. And I tried to get a job teaching in Christian schools. And of course, when they interviewed me, they told me that you're the guy we've been waiting on. You're it. You're just the man. Because math and science teachers are hard to find. And so, and we'll get in touch with you. But nobody ever called me. I guess I interviewed at about 35 or 40 different Christian schools in Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. And nobody ever called me back. And I found out later that a person who assumed that he knew something about me that he didn't, he had spread the word on me. And this was a turn down because of that. But the guy that was the head of the Servicemen's Christian Center, he was on the board of directors. He was a pastor down in Lower Delaware, in Milford, Lincoln actually. And so he found out about me, and he asked me to come down and be a teacher down there in Milford. And I did that. Went down, interviewed for the job, and was accepted. The church voted on me because it was a church school. Church voted on me. And then when I went back down there, I graduated from college on December 22nd, 1974. And when we moved down there, the day after that, the 23rd of December, of course, school was closed for the holidays. Well, when school opened back up the third day of January of 1975, I found out that I was not the teacher anymore. I was the principal. Because over the holidays, the principal had resigned and moved to Colorado with her husband. And the railroad transferred him out there. So I still taught 4 classes there in the mornings, and I principaled in the afternoon. They promised to get somebody else because I plainly told them I did not want to be the principal. That's why I retired from the Army, is one of the reasons, to get out of that administrative position. And they never did get anybody. So after 2 years, I put my resignation in. Went out and found them a principal. And then I couldn't get a job because of these schools that all had their minds turned against me, all in that area. I didn't know what to do. So I spent some money and put my name in an advertisement, an international jobs paper that goes all over the world for administrators, teachers, and whatever in Christian schools. And while I was in Delaware, I had joined the Gideons. I had become a Gideon. And one of the guys in the Gideons was a principal of a public school over there in Delaware. And he got tired of the public school system, and he had moved to West Virginia and was principal of Greater Beckley Christian School.
What was his name?
Melvin Jameson.
And Greater Beckley wouldn't have been that old a school at that time, maybe 4 or 5 years old?
4 years old. Yeah. And so he saw my name in that flyer because they were looking for a math and science teacher. And he called me, and Deborah and I came to West Virginia, and the school board met on Sunday afternoon and interviewed us. And I stayed over on Monday and interviewed the pastor of the church, which at that time was called Fundamental Baptist Church, and to see what kind of a church they had and what kind of a pastor they had, because that was important to me. Because I'd found a couple of churches already while I was in college. When I was in college, you had to go to church on Sunday and report back on what you heard. Well, having never been in church before, I didn't know one church from another. And man, I got into some bad ones. When Deborah and I got married, and I took her to the church about 2 blocks from where I was living, and after we came out there, she started crying. I said, "What's the matter?" "Cormie, that's no church. We can't go back there." I said, "What's wrong?" And she says, "They're a John Birch Society church." Yeah. And they're very racist. And I wondered why there were no black people there, because we were out on the edge of D.C. And but anyway, so we didn't go back there, and we did. Somebody from the college recommended a church to us. And
I can only imagine what your report said on Monday.
Oh man.
No wonder they were going against you.
Yeah. When they found out where I'd been going, yeah. Yeah. John Birch Society. At that time, they were advocating shipping all African Americans back to Africa, getting rid of all the Jews, and I can't remember what else, but they were in part of this Aryan race thing. And so that was my introduction to church. But I finally got into a good one, and I learned what a church was like. And so when I came to West Virginia, that's why I interviewed the pastor so thoroughly. He said, "I've never been interviewed before by a prospective member." He said, "We've always interviewed them." But I asked him his position on just about everything. And So we decided, of course, in 1977, I don't know if y'all were here or not, but there was a coal boom.
I've heard of it.
And you could not find a place to live anywhere. There was not one empty house. There was no houses on the market. There was none for rent. You couldn't even rent an apartment. And the apartment right up the street here, behind Kroger's,
Right.
yeah, they had 100 people on the waiting list. But there was a guy named Bob Pulliam, who was a doctor, and he was president of the board at the Greater Beckley Christian School, and he wanted me out here. So one of his patients worked for the admissions office up there, that apartment complex. And so me and Debbie jumped 100 people, and because that was one of the things, if we can't have a place to live, we can't come. And so we moved in up there, sight unseen, and brought our cat with us. Found out we weren't supposed to have a cat. So it was in August of 77. Spring of 78, they kicked us out because of the cat.
Didn't report the cat, huh?
I saw the cat sitting up in the window of the apartment. And of course, they gave us some time to get out, find a place, but there wasn't any place to find. So that's why we bought that place over on Sadie Street.
Sadie Street.
It was.
And, I guess you lived in Sadie Street for close to 30 years.
Yep.
And you furnished it with flowers and other assorted plants and vegetables, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Had a fantastic garden, rose bushes, shrubs, hedges. Had probably 500 tulips. And when we sold at the place, of course, we didn't take any of that stuff with us. And went back over there one day, just after we sold it, to see what the guy was doing, because he said he thought he might paint the place. And there weren't any shrubs. Trees were mostly gone. All flowers were gone. Rose bushes were gone. Clean sweep. He left one shrub on the corner. That was a burning bush. And that kind of marked the corner of the property.
Yeah. I'm not so sure that house hasn't been sold again since you sold it. That would have been, what, 2006, 2007?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I came to Greater Beckley, and I taught math and science there for 9 years, maybe 9.5, something like that. Yeah. And I just kind of wore out teaching and dealing with more, not so much the kids, but dealing with parents. Parents were uncooperative. Not every parent. We had some beautiful parents, some fantastic parents. But there was enough parents that were uncooperative, and all they wanted was their kids to make straight A's, and that's all they were interested in. And when you sit down with a parent and tell that mother that, I'm sorry, but your daughter will probably never be an A math student. She just doesn't have that potential in her background. Well, she made straight A's before we brought her to Greater Beckley. And I had to explain to her how that some of the schools at that time were giving everybody A's just to pass them on. And but we had to discriminate between students by grades. And then I got threatened to be sued because I posted grades on the bulletin board in my classroom. And so I had to stop that. And so those kind of things kind of led me to kind of getting fed up, and didn't know what else to do with my life. And
So that would have put you about, what, 55, 56 years old?
And so since 19, what year would that have been in? 1986 about. Yeah. And So I resigned. I'd already put in my letter that I was going to be back next year, and I went in and pulled my letter and told them I would not be back. And didn't know what to do with myself. So I went to looking around. I went up to, at that time, Beckley College, because there were some other colleges meeting up there. Just looking around to see what they had to offer. And this lady came in, and she asked me if she could help me, and I told her what I was doing and that I was in the process of probably changing careers. And she said, well, what have you been doing? And I told her, and she says, well, what do you think you'd like to do? I said, I'd like to get in a position where I could help people. I said, because so many people have helped me in my life that I would certainly like to kind of return the favor by helping others. And she just kind of laughed. And she said, it's amazing that you met me here. Come on in my office. We were in her office for 4 hours. And when we came out, I'd already been enrolled in the College of West Virginia College of Graduate Studies. I already had my entire program scheduled and laid out for me. So then the next thing was to get a job. So I walked out to the mall one morning and knocked on doors and nobody there. I finally got to the store. I saw people in there. I knocked on the door. It was early. I thought if you're going to apply for a job, you ought to get out there early, you know. And
I don't think the mall opened till like 10 o'clock.
This was down there where Shules is. Yeah.
Okay. Used to be the old A&P grocery store and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I finally got to this one place, and it turned out to be Winder's catalog store. There were some people in there, and the lady who I later came to know as Goldie came to the door, wondered what I wanted. And I said, well, I was just looking to see if maybe y'all could use a warehouseman or an inventory man or something like that. She says, what? I said, I thought maybe I'd check and see if y'all could use a warehouseman or an inventory man. And she said, you experienced that? I said, yeah. She said, just wait a minute. She shut the door and she went back and talked to the guy in there. She come back and said, come in. And I interviewed Matt Winder. You probably know Matt, don't you?
I know the name, but I don't know.
Yeah. And he's mayor of Oak Hill. And but that time he was a very active businessman. Had 5 stores scattered around southern West Virginia. And he says, we always give anybody that's applying for a job a little test. So I went back. It took me about an hour to take this written test that he had. Question, multiple choice, true and false, stuff like that. Gave it back to him. He said, well, wait just a few minutes. He said, I'll check it. He called me back in, and he said, I've never had anybody do one like this before. I said, I don't understand what you mean. He said, it looks like you were trying to be kind of truthful. I said, well, I do believe in the truth. And he said, I've never had anybody claim that they had rolled a drunk, or that they had robbed somebody, or that they had stolen, and this sort of thing. And I says, well, the question was there, have you ever rolled anybody? And I said, yes, because I had. I rolled a drunk in the alley one time. Didn't have much on him, but that was enough to get a bottle. And he asked me what was the deal, and I told him. I explained who I was and what I was. And he said, I like your honesty. And he said, Goldie says she knows you from, you taught her children at a Greater Beckley Christian School. And I told him, I said, I'm going to be a part-time job because I'm going to be going to college, working on a master's degree in counseling. And he said, fine. He said, we'll work your schedule around that. So I worked there for him for over 2 years, and even helped him put in a store up in Summersville. Yeah, enjoyed it. It was a good experience, and I was pretty much on my own. Hardly anybody ever. They told me what my duties were, and I did them. It was a good job. Yeah. And I guess he appreciated my work because he gave me 2 or 3 raises while I was there in just 2 years' time. And so when I finished college, I didn't know what I was going to do next for work, and I'd already applied to FMRS about 3 or 4 times, and they turned me down every time. And I found out that it wasn't just the education that I didn't have enough of at that time, but one of the people on the board was he's an atheist, and adamantly opposed to having Christian counselors because one of his questions was, well, would you talk to people about God in a counseling session? I said, I certainly would if it was appropriate. And of course that cut me off right there, no job. And I found this out later. I didn't know that at the time. I only found that out after I went to work over there.
Did you ever think about going into an entirely just Christian counseling setting?
No, I didn't. I looked at a couple of those and I didn't like it. For one, they required people to have cash up front because most of them were not billing insurance, and they didn't take Medicaid, and most of the people I wanted to help, they either didn't have cash up front or they didn't have insurance. And so that's why in my master's program I majored in community agency counseling, which is where you minister to the unfortunate people that are down on the luck and that sort of thing, are in trouble. And so I was asked to come and interview for a job at the Center for Independent Living over on Prince Street. They were just getting started, and they needed somebody over there that could teach people how to cook, how to shop, just skills training, how to live independently. And of course,
if they needed to roll somebody in the alley, you were the guy.
Yeah, boy. And of course, I had a lot of experience. In the Army, I'd been teaching people how to do all that stuff for years, and especially when I was a drill instructor, that was one of your main jobs, to teach people how to do their laundry, how to make their bed, how to clean the floor, how to wash the bathroom, how to clean toilet bowls. That kind of stuff.
If you ran out of the need to teach that, if they got good at it, you always had Grand Theft Auto and all that to fall back on, didn't you?
Yeah. And so I worked there for 2 years, and then one day I got a phone call, and it was FMRS calling me and asking me if I'd like to come over there. They had an opening.
This had been, about 1990, early 90s?
88. 1988. No, 1888 we started the center. It was 1990.
So you've been at FMRS 25 years.
Yeah, 1990. I went over there.
Really your third career.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I went there in the spring of 1990. Yeah, and I said certainly, and I said, but I need to give them two weeks notice to here, and so I did, and I went over, and I didn't even have to interview because I had done an interview 2 or 3 times in the past, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? And she said the first thing she wanted me to do was to take over a panic and anxiety group. It had about 17, 18 people in it. And she says, we know that you're a believer, that you're a Christian, and we know that when you interviewed that you said that you would mention God to people if it was appropriate. But I'm going to ask you to please don't take your Bible into the group session. She said the reason you can get in this job is because the lady that was running this group insisted on taking the Bible in there and preaching to the group and reading the scriptures to them.
Little did they know that you had it all memorized anyway, right?
And Kathy knew that too. And so a couple of people in the group complained and threatened to sue because she brought the Bible in. But some folks, I don't know if y'all know it or not, but some people are as afraid of the Bible as they are of a scorpion or a bear or something. I mean, they can't even bear to have it in their presence. It's like as if it's going to hurt them or something or attack them, and that's just the attitude they have toward it. And so I've been there since 1990, and I worked full time. And one of the things I need to, before I go any further, I need to bring up my time in my master's program. I'm working at Winters.
You want to pause for a minute?
I'm ready when you guys are. Type this out so that you guys can start.
You on?
It's going.
Okay.
Masters.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure I get in there is while I was working on my master's degree, it took me 5 years because I was doing it evenings and weekends, and I was also working part-time, and I worked almost every day. My wife was also working full-time, and about the only communication we had was writing notes to one another. She worked days, I worked evenings and weekends, went to school evenings and weekends. We hardly ever saw one another in the flesh, except maybe for a couple of hours during the night when we were asleep. And during this time, she just, I didn't know this until later on. She told me this after I'd already graduated and was working at FMRS, that she had to go to counseling because this thing of just living alone for 5 years had gotten to her. And so it was a good thing that there were a couple of good counselors in the area. Bill Kennedy was one. You knew Bill, I think, didn't you, Steve? Mm-hmm. And Bill Bartlett was another one. And they saw her just off, on the cuff. I mean, off the cuff, no charge or anything like that. And they counseled with her for between the two of them a couple of years. And that probably saved our marriage, but I didn't know that. And she didn't let me know that. She never complained, she never whined. Boy, this makes me appreciate her that much more. The kind of lady she is. And but she was determined that she was going to stick it out with me. And so finally, at the age of 60, I finally graduated from my master's program. And but I had already gone to work for FMRS before I graduated, and also while I was doing that master's program, towards the end of it, I was doing my practicum. You don't get paid for that. That's in addition to going to school, working part-time, and then going to, I did at the Beckley Work Release Center. I counseled over there on Tuesday evenings. I counseled at FMRS. It's pro bono. You can't get paid for that. At FMRS on Thursday afternoon, Thursday evenings. And I was doing counseling at the Center for Independent Living on evenings, and sometimes on Saturday if I wasn't in school or working. And it was all being recorded, sometimes on video, sometimes on tape, for submission to my professors. And so I guess that is probably why I guess Deborah reached the point where she figured she was no longer married, because I was just not there. I was gone. Yeah. And so it was very refreshing to find out what had happened, and that she had stuck it out and had sought help, and she got a lot of good help too. And that's what she's doing a lot of right now. She's helping a lot of other ladies, just off the record. Yeah. And I wanted to get that part in there because we've not said much about Deborah, but she is one of the biggest parts of my life. I mean, I just don't really know if I know that God would have something for me to do, but I just don't know if life would be very meaningful if I didn't have her as a part of my life. And as I look back over my life, I can see these God moments, these Romans 8:28 moments, these times when God put me and her and me and other people and her and other people together, put us together at just crucial times in our lives. And so I really appreciate that. I worked full-time at FMRS from...
Do you think back probably every day and think, you know, I've had 50 years on a third chance with somebody that would mean that much in your life? And even though you just talked about going 5 years where you were doing your own thing,
Yeah.
and she stuck it out, I guess what I'm thinking is, if you're in the classroom, you don't always see what's going on. If you're outside looking in the classroom, you can tell. But we probably don't appreciate what we have going on in life very often, really, do we? So it did, in 1990, that probably made you appreciate it a little bit more, or learn how to, didn't it?
Yeah, boy. Yes. And I there are a number of things that I've learned in the last 25 years that I never even thought of before. And one of them is that, we'll just take my age, for instance. So many people will never make it beyond 70. Even the Bible talks about that being it, you know. And here I am, got 17 more years on top of that. I put it in the computer and printed it out, and I got a placard up on my wall in my office that speaking about how much I appreciate the extra years that I've been given, and I pray every day that I will not waste those years, waste that extra time that God has given me, that it will be used for His glory, for helping people. And I don't really want any praise or honor or glory for what I do. I get it, and it's appreciated, you know, when they pat you on the back and build you up and put your picture in the paper and say what a great job you've done and all that kind of stuff. That's appreciated. But if I'm not careful and self-centered a person as I've been for a good part of my life, that could lead me right back into the wrong way of living.
Right.
It can get me so puffed up that I think I don't need God anymore.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened yet, but it could be, I guess. Yeah.
And, of course, there's some things that we'd never get the whole story here.
Oh.
And we may go back and touch on this, but when you talk about that, when you talk about getting puffed up and getting your picture in the paper, a little too much affirmation, I guess, Cormie, is you could turn into that jackass that you've been called before.
Yes, I have been called a jackass. The only person that ever calls me a jackass is my dearly beloved Deborah. She's only done it once, but she was very serious. And it got my attention.
You understand right then.
And it got my attention. It surely did. Yeah. And in my full-time work over at FMRS, I've done a lot of things, and I've enjoyed them. I do a lot of group work. I did even more the first number of years I was over there. And I did panic and anxiety group, chronic pain group. I still do those today. I did a group. I had a co-therapist with me on this group, the adults who were sexually abused or molested as children, but have managed to survive and who are now suffering as adults because of what happened to them, children. I had about 25 people most of the time in that group. It was an open group where you could come and go. And it was filled up most of the time of adults who were sexually abused and molested as children and who were just now, as adults, some of them in their up in the 30s and 40s, just now beginning to address that issue and recover from it. And some of them whose own parents and grandparents had abused them sexually. And neighbors, older brothers and sisters, just coaches, pastors. It was, I finally reached a point where I couldn't do it anymore. It became overwhelming just to have to go in there every evening and on Thursday evenings and deal with all the issues that this group brought up. I'm glad that I had a very, very talented co-therapist in there with me, a female. And she's still practicing. I don't know. I think she's partially retired now, but she was a fantastic co-therapist, and she was also my one of my supervisors in while I was working on getting my social work license. I got my social work license by having a clinical social worker supervised me for 4 years. Instead of going to college to get it, I got on-the-job training with a clinical social worker overseeing me and writing reports on me, and having to go to, in addition to what I was doing, working, I had to go to 40 hours of classes every year, which came out to be 160 hours or something like that. And so I got my social work license by grandfathering because of my work. And one of the things that I got a real kick out of while I was full-time at FMRS was on call. You're on call about 6 times a year for a week at a time. Plus you had one holiday. And that meant that while you're on call, you probably didn't sleep. You'd be called out anytime during the night and the weekend. The magistrate's office, they do things a little differently now, but going to the magistrate's office to evaluate someone who's being either going to go to jail, go to a state hospital, go to a local hospital, go to a crisis unit or something of that nature. And I liked that, and it was exciting because it was almost every case when I had to go out in the nighttime like that, and it was every night when you're on call. It wasn't just once in a while. And sometimes I've gone out at 10, 11 o'clock at night and didn't get back home till 5 in the morning. And but it was a big adrenaline rush, big adrenaline, dealing with the police and these clients being shackled to the table and all that. It was kind of exciting, yeah. However, I got tired of that beeper going off in the middle of the night. My wife got tired of it. Deborah said, there's enough of this. Is there something you can do about it? I talked to my supervisor. She says, why don't you retire and come back on part-time? So in 2003, I retired in September of 2003. I retired on a Friday, came back to work on the next Tuesday, part-time. So since 2003, I've been working part-time. Yeah.
Now you told me, just to interrupt the story a little bit,
Sure.
a couple months ago, since you're talking about retiring, and this is, I guess, the third retirement that we're up to,
Yeah.
and of course, this is 2003, so the last 12 years you've been doing this part-time thing, probably 2 or 3 days a week at least over at FMRS.
2.5 days.
2.5 days. And I don't know, it's been a couple of months ago, we ran into each other and we had a conversation, which usually goes on a little while, and you said, you announced I'm gonna quit. I told him at work I'm gonna quit. And I didn't say anything to you, but my first thought was, Cormie, you can't do that. That's the worst thing you'll ever do. You can't, what are you gonna do? You can't quit. But before I could figure out how to say that to my friend, hopefully he would have listened. He said, yeah, I told him when I turned 90. And I thought, we got another 3 years.
Yes.
But I got a feeling at 90, I may have to tell you again, you can't quit.
Well,
or you're going to have to find another career, and hopefully Debbie will let you go back to school if you need to do that.
well, one of the guys that I really looked up to, read all of his books. I sat under him in class several occasions, workshops, not just regular classes, but in workshops that lasted like 4 or 5 hours on Friday evening and all day Saturday. And so he was the most foul-mouthed person in the world, claimed to be an atheist. But his method of counseling is the most biblically based method of counseling that I've ever run across. It's nouthetic counseling, which is where you challenge people on their thinking and their behaviors. And Albert Ellis, and he was still doing counseling at 94. And the last workshop that I went to sit under him in, does that make sense? Sit under him in.
Yep.
Last workshop I went to hear him, they had to help him on the platform, and he taught from a chair. But he saw no reason, and a couple of us asked him, why do you keep on doing this? He said, well, now is when I know what I'm doing. He said, it took me many years to learn how to do this. And he said, now is when I'm my most effective. He said, why would you want to quit when you're at your most effective? And I also wrote a note and asked him why he used so much foul language. And he said, well, I'm a counselor in New York City. And he said, if you don't talk to the people up there in the Bronx like that, he says they don't believe that you're real. And I thought, wow, I'm glad I'm not working up there.
Yeah. And it's a pretty good answer. We get sort of stuck in our own culture.
Sure.
And we don't realize it's a lot different in a lot of different places in the world. We don't master our own culture, so if we can't do that, it's maybe hard to even understand another culture.
Well, since I've retired, of course, and I'm working all day Thursday, all day Tuesday, and a half a day on Wednesday, I've wound up doing other things, and when people ask me to, not just anything that people ask me, but Leon Brush came up and told me that he and his wife were getting ready to start a safe house for people young men who wanted to recover from drugs because of their son having died from an overdose, Brian. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to be on my board of directors. And he said, I'd like you to teach some classes. And so I do that on Wednesday mornings. Of course, I meet with my accountability partner at 6:30 every Wednesday morning. I have now for over 20 years. I don't know if either one of y'all have an accountability partner or not, but I think that's been a lifesaver for me. is to have somebody that you feel free, that you can be open and share just anything with them. And they won't judge you, but they will correct you, and they will give you suggestions. And after that, I go to the Safe House on Wednesday mornings, and I teach a Bible class up there. And I'm teaching them the same thing that my mentor taught me when I first became a Christian. How to use the Scripture, how to read the Scripture, how to study the Scripture, how to give a testimony, how to memorize Scripture. And but then also they're learning from me, because I constantly give them my story, a little piece of my story every time to go along with the lesson. They're learning that a person, no matter how far down the scale you've gone, no matter how deep a pit you dropped into, there's hope. And a lot of the guys at the Safe House, they come in there, they don't have any hope left. It's gone. Some of them have attempted suicide because they wanted to stop the drugs and the alcohol, and found out that they couldn't. They didn't realize what an addiction was. And so to hear someone tell about, after 15 years of being drunk every day, we're able to kick that through the grace of God, and it's all been God's grace. There may be a little bit I've done, and I guess that would be obeying the people who tried to help me, doing what they suggested. But it's purely by the grace of God that I'm sober today, and enjoying being sober. See, so many people. I knew one fella, use his first name anyway, Rex, back years ago. Rex had been sober for 15 years, but he was an atheist. He refused to take part in any kind of a help group or support group. He sat at the counter in a restaurant. I sat down beside of him and talked to him many a day. He sat down there and drank coffee and fussed and groaned and whined and bitched and carried on for the whole rest of his life. And he had a crew of men working for him, and they couldn't stand to be around him. He was so grouchy. So he was sober, but miserable. And I certainly would not want to live like that. So it's by the grace of God that I'm living happy and sober and free.
Do you think sometimes, and it's just a question, sort of pops in my head from what you're saying, that with addicts, alcoholics, that part of, maybe a small part of the issue of overcoming that is the thought mentally that I can't be happy unless I have it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it becomes maybe even a fear. You know, I can't, watch TV. I don't know how to enjoy life without it. It won't be enjoyable.
Yeah.
And it can carry over even if you're sober. You can still not enjoy it. Because, well, just what you were just saying.
Yeah, I attended 2 meetings last night over in the basement of the Episcopal Church on Virginia Street. And there was another guy there. He attended both meetings. And I've known him for a number of years. And he's a very bitter man. And he's sober and has been sober for quite a while. He's an alcoholic. And he expressed some resentments last night that he refuses to turn loose of. He had resentments against some of his family. He had resentments against a former employer. And because of that, he's nourishing those resentments, refusing to turn them loose, refusing to forgive these people. And because of it, he's miserable. I don't want to be like that either. We made some suggestions to him, but I don't really think he's going to take them, because I think he enjoys being miserable. I shouldn't say that, because that's judging him.
It's becoming his identity. That's what he knows.
Yeah.
You're comfortable with what you know.
Yes, he takes those out and polishes them up on a regular basis.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to live like that. And I do go to the meetings on Thursday nights over there on a regular basis. I like to go to the one at the Presbyterian Church on Friday nights because we study. That's a study group rather than just a sharing group. And although we do share some, and so Mondays I go up to the Southern West Virginia Fellowship Home. Oftentimes in Monday mornings. Of course, I've missed a couple since we've been doing this. And meeting with the fellows up there. Nothing formal, just informal meeting with the guys, talking with them, just like we're doing right now. Answering questions and sharing our strength, experience, and hope with one another. Yeah.
We may be getting off on a little bit of a tangent off your story, but this to me may be an important piece of the story. One of the many things, I can't make a list, and I won't say that I've learned them from you, but you do a pretty good job of calling into question or making me think, or opening up a door into my thought process. And I still haven't, at my age now, middle-aged, I'm hoping that, I get to 70 years, 87 would be great too. How different would I be? But one of the questions that I've asked myself, and I think that only God and myself can come up with the answer, but this is where you as a friend and mentor, I'm going to ask, how have you had to learn for yourself how to forgive? I don't know that that's always the same answer for everybody, but it's an important question for me. To, what's your how do you forgive, Cormie?
Well, I carried a lot of resentments around for a long time. They weren't always active, except for two of them. Two of them were very active. I was like this guy that I just talked about last night. I took them out and polished them up regularly. And
made you feel good and bad at the same time, didn't it?
Yes. And of course, it kept me miserable part of the time, even though I was enjoying being sober and participating in church groups and things like that, and Bible studies and whatever. I still had a degree of misery because of the resentments I was carrying around. Then a fellow came to our church back in 1986, and his name will come in a little while, but he has a ministry of reaching out to people and engaging them in prayer and teaching people how to forgive and the importance of forgiveness. And I had been in the AA program. We always close our meeting with what folks call the Lord's Prayer, which is really the disciples' prayer. Jesus taught them how to pray. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So when you analyze that,
you got no chance.
What you're asking is, God, don't forgive me because I haven't forgiven these people.
That's right.
So
give me the portion that I
Yes.
give back. Yeah.
So he spent a week over here at our church, and I finally went into the prayer group with him one night and shared some of the things that I was holding resentments about. And he shared with me personally, one-on-one, some keys to forgiveness. He even recommended a book written by Charles Stanley about forgiveness. And so I began the work of forgiveness. I also began the work of asking others to forgive me. I had done a little of that in the past.
That was part of the AA experience we
Yes.
talked about out in Colorado.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But there were two people that I had never made peace with. And so I finally arranged to meet with my daughter, who had refused to speak to me for 15 years. And before I arranged that, I had 4 or 5 guys praying for me on a daily basis that this would come to pass, and not that she would forgive me, but that I would be able to present myself and humble myself enough to ask my daughter to forgive me for not being there for her when she needed me, back when she was a kid. So this time, when I called, she didn't hang up on me. And so Deborah and I went over and met with her. And I asked her if she could find it in her heart to forgive me. And I said, what for? That I would appreciate it. But if she couldn't, that would be all right. I would understand. And she started crying. And she said, I've been waiting on this for 41 years. And because I told her how sorry I was and the fact that I was not there and all that sort of thing. And she said, yes, I do forgive you. So she cried, I cried, Deborah cried, her husband cried. Her husband I'd never met. A 5-year-old granddaughter I'd never met. She cried. We all cried. And that took a terrible load off of me. And we established a real good relationship now, not just with her and her husband and her youngest daughter, but with another daughter that I had never had any time with, another granddaughter, and 2 great-granddaughters. It's just been wonderful to have that load off of you. Well, this is the key. I wrote my son. I found out from my daughter where he lived, and had got her address, and I wrote him a letter and asked him for forgiveness. And it was a good long letter, and I didn't think he was going to answer back. About six weeks or so later, I finally got a letter back. The first thing he said was, Dad, I forgave you years ago. And I wrote him back and I asked him, why in the world? I hadn't even asked you for forgiveness. He said, it's so simple. He said, I got so tired of carrying you around in my head. And so that was a real incentive for me to really get with the forgiveness business. And so I still had 2 people that I was resentful toward. Serious resentments. One of them, the person in authority, had made a decision about me that has been costing me about $3,000 a month since 1971. I figured that up last night while that guy was talking about his resentments in the meeting. I just looked at my little styrofoam cup and I figured it out. Come to $1.5 million. But I could laugh about it because I had forgiven him a long time ago now. And I can even talk about it. And I don't need to seek revenge. I don't need to get even with him or any of that stuff. I've turned him loose completely.
So was this an administrator or someone over you in the Army?
Yes, he was not just over me. He was at the Pentagon. He was in charge of the warrant officer program. And I was at the top of the list for a couple of years. Everybody else was going up, getting promoted.
So you were on that promotion list when you quit, but you'd never gotten promoted.
That's right.
Do you ever think back if you'd gotten that promotion, would you have gotten out?
I probably wouldn't have, but I'd probably be dead because I would have immediately been sent back to Vietnam, which was one of the reasons I retired.
We'll just put that on the list of that small God thing.
You better believe it.
That $1.5 million doesn't mean a whole lot, does it?
Shucks, $1.5 million doesn't mean nothing.
Yeah.
I probably would never have married Deborah. I've gone over this on several occasions. Every time that comes up in my mind, instead of thinking about how to get even with him like I used to, how to get revenge like I used to, I think about, praise God that I don't have that hanging over me. I didn't get that promotion. I didn't go back to Vietnam. I didn't get killed. I met this wonderful gal who's become my wife for 44 years now, or 45.
Now let me ask you though, still this day, can he pop in your mind, and for a split second at least, you still harbor those thoughts, and do you have to go back and say, hey, this has been taken care of?
I've only had to do that a couple of times. Just a couple of times. And it usually came at a time when I was at one of my low spiritual ebbs. Yeah. The other fella.
See, I like what you just said, because most people that know you, not just you, but other, we never think anybody else has any kind of low spiritual web or low web or anything in life. But here's, it's Cormie. Cormie's got his own star up in the sky as far as I'm concerned. And you.
I'm still human.
Yeah. It's good to know that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as beneficial as anything else. Is to know even Cormie gets down a little bit.
Yeah, the other fella, he did me great harm through ignorance. He thought that I had done something that I didn't do. He assumed it. And he was the reason why I couldn't get a job teaching in all these places over in Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and so forth. Because he spread, he even cost me a teaching job at the Bible College. They had a campus over on the Eastern Shore. And while I was in Delaware teaching over there, they asked me to to teach a couple of courses in the Eastern Shore campus at Washington Bible College, which was a preparation, I think, for going to Africa for a campus they were establishing over there. However, that didn't come about. But because it didn't come about, look where I am today. I'm in Beckley, West Virginia. I had this wonderful experience of meeting all these wonderful people, teaching for 9.5 years in Greater Beckley. I've got students from that 9.5 years that come and look me up when they come to town. Some of them are doctors, lawyers. They come and express their appreciation for my firmness, my strictness in making them do what they need to do, and for counseling with them on a one-to-one basis from time to time. I would have missed out on all that. I would have missed out on these people coming by to see me. I have a couple of folks that live out in Arizona now, and every time they're in town, they were two of my students. They make a special effort to stop by and look me up. Yes. And one guy whose family disowned him because he refused to go into the medical profession, because his family were all doctors, medical doctors. And he came by to see me often. And when he got his PhD in advanced education, he came by I was one of the first people he showed it to. And also to let me know that his family had taken him back in now that he had a doctorate. Yeah. But he wanted to tell me how much he appreciated the mathematics that I taught him, which laid the groundwork for his further education. And also the teaching style that I had led him into the education field himself. But his family looked down on teachers as being inferior people. And so that I would have missed out on all that. Yeah. So I've got a lot of blessings from not getting promoted.
And learning how to forgive.
Oh yes, learning how to forgive, because if I was still carrying those grudges around, I'd be miserable.
Yeah.
I might not even be alive. I might have killed myself.
With stress.
With stress and intestinal problems.
That's completely different than just general internal problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you're stressed all the time, you can really mess your guts up. Yeah. I don't know where we're going from here in this tale that we're telling and talking about. But I am at the point right now where I think I'm probably enjoying life more than I ever have at any time in my life. Yeah.
I could understand that. I think if I try to put myself in your shoes, which is hard to do, and we'll maybe talk about a shoe story here in a second, but one thing that I see, and you've helped me do this, and I've been fortunate to be around some people that are more mature, and what I mean by that is an age. And I've always gotten along pretty well with people, older people. Mainly because I like to listen, I like to cut up, and I think things are funny. I think a lot of it. I've noticed with my dad, who's younger than you by not quite 10 years, I guess, and he's an old farmer. Noticed a couple of things with my parents is that as I've gotten older and they've gotten older, is the roles become reversed a little bit. I don't see them a whole lot. I'm 8 or 9 hours away, but they become sort of childlike in a lot of ways, except they're set in their ways because they've got, nearly 80 years. But the roles become reversed a little bit, and I think most people probably end up seeing that a little bit. But I also see, especially with my dad, and I think I've learned to pick up on it because of you in particular, is that he sort of has a childlike joy sometimes because there's not as much stress. I think there's still life to live, and there's things that you worry about. But seeing in Western Kentucky, there's a lot of corn. Seeing a corn crop that's 8 feet tall is just a wonder of the world. And when you're trying to make a living and trying to raise a family and all those things, maybe you don't see that. But I've always seen in you a childlike joy that I don't think you get until you get to a certain age, and maybe that's what you're trying to say. And you've got a certain experience and a certain perspective. But when I really realized that with you a couple of years ago, it's probably been maybe 4 or 5, but the first, I hadn't run in 20 some years, and we started to run a little bit, Kevin and I, and I still do. But back then, running a 5K was, I didn't think I would ever run any more than that, and I was going to do it slowly. But we were going to run the 5K at the half marathon. You show up, and you're going to run it too. I remember that day it rained, it sleeted, whatever. Before we finished, it was cold, and but we had a pre-race meal on Friday night at the college cafeteria. It was about the worst pasta you could imagine, but it was good company. And so I remember asking Cormie, I said, Cormie, are you going to win tomorrow? Your age group? It would have been in the 80 age group. I mean, how many runners could you have? And Cormie says, no, I'm not gonna win that. After you get to 70, it's unlimited. And there's a guy who's 78 that can run a 10-minute mile. And Cormie's eyes just lit up when he said that. Of course, he didn't realize that I was going to run a 10-minute mile in my age group too. But I analyzed that, and I thought, I just saw childlike wonder, and it's good to see that. As a matter of fact, it's probably as joyful as anything that I see is when I see it, especially in an older person. It means that to me, it means that you've lived life, you've gotten something out of it, and that's maybe the most pure thing that you share is that wonder. And I see that in my dad, and I see it in some other people, and I'm happy when I see that. So I don't know how I got off on that, but that's one of the things that I always look forward to when I see you, is I'm going to get a glimpse of that.
One of the things that brought me to that point was the retired school teacher. He's dead now. 10 years older than me. Every time we ran a 10K, he's 10 years older than me. And Debbie brought it to my attention after the third race. The same thing had happened. He always finished 10 minutes ahead of me.
How'd that make you feel, Cormie?
Well, it made me feel kind of, I don't know, less than. But then it dawned on me. Why are you still running these races if you can't win? And then it hit me. I'm not running to win. I'm running to finish. I'm running to finish.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what Hebrews chapter 12, first 3 verses is all about.
You can't finish if you don't show up either.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You show up, dress up, and get up. And that's the way it is. When why enter a race that you know somebody else is going to win, or they probably will, and it's to finish. Yeah. And that's what I'm in now. Is I'm in a race, the race of life, and it's kind of like a marathon.
Yeah. And in that race, we're glad that you're 10 minutes behind. We don't want you to go real fast.
Yeah.
Well, speaking on the running thing, what about you moved to Sadie Street, and I've heard the exploits of you running all over town, especially if people listen to this, hopefully one day will know Beckley. Cormie has run up the hill from downtown up Harper Road numerous times, and it probably was a good thing, but I've done that same hill. It's not any fun. Kanawha Street's not any fun, but you show up and you do it.
Yeah.
What happened the first race that you ran here, that you entered a 5K or something, and you went down to, I believe it was Hill's store, to buy a pair of running shoes at a discount store?
Before we talk about that, let me go make a pit stop.
Okay.
Okay.
Right back.
Okay.
So tell me about this big race that you decided to run. And
Well, it was my first race. 10K. It was the Appalachian Coal Festival race. About 19, I don't know what.
78, 80, something like that?
Somewhere around there, 81 or something like that. And somebody said, well, you ought to have some running shoes. So I went out the hills, and I looked out there, and, whoa, there's a great big rack in the middle of the aisle there, clearance. And there was a pair of sneakers on there for $5. They were just regular sneakers. And I said, well, they fit me. And so I thought, well, man, that'll do. So I got those sneakers, and they were high tops.
For a road race.
I didn't know any different. I was ignorant of all this.
Well, you've been running in those boots all those years.
Yeah.
Too, in the military.
And I was ignorant of all this racing protocol, that people were into with their special watches and their special shoes and their special pants and all that stuff. And I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. And but
I didn't know they were high tops, Cormie.
Yeah. Well, they were. And but you know what? I finished it. In 75 minutes.
Did the shoes finish it?
Well, the shoes finished it, but my feet didn't. Man, I'm telling you, it just about killed my feet. I could hardly walk for a week.
75 minutes for a guy. I guess you probably weren't even training at all or anything.
No,
You just
no.
decided to run it.
Uh-huh. I had done some walking recently, and had done a little bit of jogging for like a half a mile at a time or something like
Just
that.
enough to get you out of breath.
Yeah. And I thought, man, this would be fantastic. Yeah. So that's what I did.
75 minutes is not a bad time for a guy that hadn't run.
Well, that's what somebody told me.
Yeah.
Because I thought, because I was so far back behind, coming in and everything. But what I didn't know this, but he said, 75 minutes is nothing. He said, there's 2 guys behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could hardly believe that.
For a guy that hadn't run a half mile.
Yeah.
To run a 10K, you say.
Yeah.
Basically 6 miles, a little more. So how much more did you run after that? Is you sort of, you got a little bit of an obsessive personality, you would have to say, wouldn't you think?
Yes, I did.
So that the bloody shoes and the bad high tops didn't stop you. It probably made you 75 minutes. Somebody said, it's not bad. It probably made you jump in there and go. And
It did. I started talking to some other guys that were running. We had some guys in our church that were running at the time, and I talked to them. And they told me about how to find running shoes, and the best ones at that time. The best ones on the market was New Balance. It's not the case anymore, because they're made in China, and they don't.
They used to make them all up in the Northeast somewhere.
Yeah.
I had several pair of New Balance that were great to wear around.
And but I looked around, and I finally got New Balance that would fit me, because I got a strange shaped foot anyway, and I just started running every day. Maybe sometimes I would skip a Saturday or a Sunday, one or the other, but pretty much every day. And I got to where I enjoyed it. It ceased to be real hard work. I had some of those periods of hitting the runner's high, and if you've experienced that, you know how exhilarating that is. It makes you want to do it again.
Yeah.
You look for it again. Maybe this next time I can do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just feel like you're taking 7 league steps, man, and just floating through the air practically.
I haven't experienced that any time in my adulthood, but I like running just enough to do it, and I dislike it just enough to not do it much. But after you run enough, and fortunately was able to run a half marathon, run a little bit more than that, 2.5, 3 miles at a time has become fairly easy for me. I'm still slow, but it's not about anything but just doing it.
Yeah.
And it is something you do look forward to. But you put in probably about 30 years of running after that, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that's starting in your late 40s or 50s.
In the 50s.
Yeah.
Well, my last race was October of 2011.
That may have been the race that I mentioned. It was the half marathon race. That may have been the year.
I finished.
Your last one was my first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just mentioning to Keith during the break that was when we turned around to come back the second half of the race, it was sleeting and cold and miserable. And I remember waiting around, and sure enough, you came in, you finished. I believe you had a banana and waited for the awards ceremony, and was just as happy as anybody. Neither one of us got anything. You probably felt pretty good about it and went on about your day. I'm sure I went home and took a nap.
I went home. As I was driving home, I was thinking, I should have got a trophy for finishing.
Yeah, that day you should have got a trophy for showing up. Yeah, it was a memorable day.
Yeah, I finished, but even though I was last, I finished. And besides that, I had a sore hip and a sore leg, and I just determined I'm in this thing for the finish. I'm not going to quit. And that's the way I feel today about life. I have no intention of quitting. Even though I attempted to kill myself 3 times in years gone by, I would never do that now. Yeah. Because I've developed this idea of never give up, never quit. The only one I'll surrender to is God Himself. It's not that I think it's all that important. It's just that I know how terrible it is when you do give up. I've seen other people give up.
When you've given up yourself.
Several times.
Yeah.
And it's miserable.
Yeah.
It's miserable. And So
What's it feel like for you now? I would just ask the question, but I got a feeling, in my opinion, you can find more peace on earth than what you have now, but I think you have a tremendous amount of peace.
it's adequate.
And I think when you say, to me, when you say I'm not going to give up, I think you're still looking. You want a little bit more of that peace. Would that be a safe way to put it?
Sure. It's adequate right now, but it would be great to have some more. Yeah. And there's a formula laid out in Philippians chapter 4. This is verse 6. It says, don't be anxious for anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be known to God, and then the peace of God that passes all understanding shall guard your heart and your mind through Christ Jesus. And verse 8 says, finally, brethren, whatever things are honest, whatever things are just, whatever things are true, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are good report. There's 3 more I can't think of. It says, think about these kind of things, and the God of peace be with you. And this really grabbed me once when I actually sat down and read it. I was all by myself. I read it about 3 times. I don't know why I read it 3 times, but I did. And the 3rd time through it, grabbed me. Here's the peace of God on one side of that 8th verse, and the God of peace on the other side. Man, if you focus on this kind of thing, these kinds of things that are honest, just, lovely, wonderful to behold, if you focus on those kind of things, you're wrapped around with peace. The God of peace and the peace of God.
Not a lot of anxiousness in that, is it?
No. And I hesitate to give people formulas, especially scriptural formulas.
Yeah.
But I read across that one, and that's what it turned out to be. It's like almost like a mathematical formula. You know, if you do this, if this, then that.
Right.
You might remember in your math classes, and even sometimes in your grammar classes, they had these if-then statements. And I used to hate them when I was in school. And if this, then that. And go through sometimes a whole page of them.
Yeah, it's too concrete. We live in not an if-then world, we live in a but world.
Yeah.
It's a big difference,
Yeah.
isn't it?
But I have reached a point in my life where I believe that these things really work. It's like, take for instance, thinking. If you keep on thinking the way you've been thinking, you'll keep on feeling the way you've been feeling. And if you keep on feeling the way you've been feeling, you'll keep on doing what you've been doing. And if you keep on doing what you've been doing, you keep on getting what you've been getting. Whatever that might be. It might be something good, it might be something bad. But for any action, there's always some kind of consequence, either wonderful or awful. Yeah. So, it's like as if, it just follows.
It's like the definition of insanity that says doing the same thing expecting different results.
Oh, man. Run into that all the time in the counseling profession. People, they can't understand why things are still happening the same way over and over and over again. It's because they still have the same belief system, they still have the same thinking, they still have the same feelings, because when you think a certain way, it causes you to have some sort of an emotion. Maybe it's anger. Maybe your emotion that you feel is anger. Well, anger requires that you do something.
Yeah.
So
it's sort of just like your story about Rex.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't drink anymore, but he was miserable.
Yeah.
That's what he knew. That's what he was comfortable
Yeah.
with. And most of us get really comfortable. All of us, not most of us, get really comfortable with the misery that we live in, or the happiness that we live in, which always seems more fleeting than the misery. And it's not that we can't change; it's difficult. Our thought process. It's like leaving home.
Oh my goodness! Yes.
Most of the time, leaving home is the best thing that we could do. That's what we're sort of geared toward. But we have that draw from family, whatever, don't leave, and that's that mind in there of, this is what I know, this is what I can do, this is how I live, instead of taking the step out the door and realizing the whole world's there, and I can still come back to where I'm from if I choose to.
Yeah, this is the Monday night discussion group that I'm involved in uptown, there in Beckley, where we discuss the Bible and a lot of other things, of course. You can't discuss the Bible without other things coming into the picture. And I was asked to come and help with that. And I thought, I've not done this before. When I'm at Brian's Safe House, this is a controlled environment. I'm in charge of the study, you know. I can take it any direction I want to.
And you feel pretty good about that, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
But when I go up here on Monday night, all of us up there, we're all in the same boat. We're all recovering alcoholics or drug addicts. The only thing is, some are atheists. One guy's a Buddhist. He professes to be a Buddhist. I'm not sure if he really is or not. And there's a couple other that are agnostic. And then there's 2 or 3 believers. And so you don't know what kind of a challenge or a question you're going to get when you throw something out. This last Monday night, we discussed the God-man, the confluence of Jesus' humanity and his deity. How is that possible in one person for be both God and man at the same time? Of course, a lab scientist could explain how that happens. In science, they call it a hypostatic union. And of course, the theologians have picked up on that, and that's what they apply to Jesus being both God and man. Is hypostatic union. Yeah. So
How do the Buddhists take that?
Facepalm.
Oh. We're not on video, Cormie.
Well, I didn't know how to explain that, but I thought that by demonstrating it, you'd get the
I
picture.
get it.
Yeah. However, he did eventually, towards the end of the discussion Monday night, he did make some comments, and just to think about this is amazing. Just to think of the possibilities of it is amazing. Yeah.
So we have a place that we could.
Whenever you're ready.
Have you got anything else to add just off the top of your head right now at this point in time?
No. I think there are a lot of things. I'll just add this one thing at the end about the Monday night discussion group. I see a lot of people that are coming to that group profiting from it. They're opening up their mind because they have never discussed things like this before. Like even in an AA meeting, even though they call it a discussion meeting, it's never a discussion. A topic is chosen and you discuss that topic. You don't discuss the topic, you talk about that topic, and then you've had your say and you don't talk anymore. You don't get to double dip. And you can't respond to somebody else because there's not supposed to be any crosstalk. But with this discussion group, this is the first time many of them have ever sat down with other people and actually discussed a topic where you could ask questions, question the person's statement, criticize what somebody has said, and be able to sit there and accept criticism of what you just said without blowing up and hitting somebody. And but these folks, there was about 15 up there, 5 ladies and 10 guys, and I think they're really profiting from it. Yeah. And with that, I'll close because I think I'm really looking forward to continuing with that.
Okay.